Hi, this is Connie at Rangjung Yeshe Institute. Today I want to talk a little bit about Tibetan poetry. So as you've seen, some of the particles can be written in two ways. They can either be written as syllables that are added after the words that they modify, or they can be written as a letter or a group of letters that are attached to the end of the last syllable of a word. This is because of poetry. As you continue to learn classical Tibetan, you'll encounter a lot of text that's either written in verse, derived from verse, or has verse contained somewhere in it. Tibetan verse consists of a series of lines, each with the same number of syllables. Now, what's really cool about this is that some forms of Tibetan verse, especially in Tibetan Buddhist texts, were originally translated from Sanskrit verse. And Sanskrit verse follows a similar structure with 4 lines, usually, each with an identical number of syllables. So when you think about what the translators were doing when they were translating texts from Sanskrit into Tibetan, it's really actually remarkable that they were able to preserve not only these dense, complex philosophical ideas that were contained in the Sanskrit verses, but that they also maintained this poetic style. Now, this is all important because in Tibetan poetry, words can be shortened, particles can be omitted, or you can have extra particles that don't have any meaning at all just added in there seemingly randomly, all for the sake of preserving the meter. So in a way, looking at verse, even though it's shorter, can be a lot more difficult to understand than long sentences when you're looking at Tibetan prose. So let's look at an example.
Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika is considered one of the most important texts in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. This text was originally written in Sanskrit and was later translated into Tibetan. One verse reads, Sangye namki chutempa, dempa nila yangdakte, jikden kunzup dempa tang, dampe dunki dempao. We're not going to get into too many of the grammatical details just yet, but I just want to point out a few examples of where particles come into play when determining the meter in Tibetan poetry. This verse means, the Dharma taught by the Buddhas is based on 2 truths, the truth of worldly convention and the ultimate truth. Let's just look at the last 2 lines. Jikden kunzup dempa tang, dampe dunki dempao, the truth of worldly convention and the ultimate truth. Starting with the 3rd line, Jikden kunzup dempa, from what we've learned about connective particles so far, we should expect to see a connective particle between jikden and kunzup, because connective particles connect adjectives to nouns. So we would expect this to say, the conventional truth which is worldly. The reason that the connective particle is missing in this case is because if we added it, we would simply have too many syllables in this line. If this phrase were written in prose, we would expect to see jikden gi kunzup dempa. Now let's look at the 4th line, dampe dunki dempao. Look at the connective particle here between dampe dun and denpa. Normally, when we see the phrase ultimate truth written in prose, it's written dundam denpa. But because we're finding this phrase dampe dunki denpa in verse, we need enough syllables in the line. That's why we have the connective particle here, and that's why this is written in the way that it is. So altogether, we have truth, which is, remembering that function of the connective particle, the highest meaning. Again, dampa and dun being connected by the connective particle because the connective particle can connect an adjective to a noun. Finally, the at the end is actually a separate syllable, even though it's not separated from the pa by a dot. This is commonly found in prose as well as in poetry. You're not expected to be able to know all of this right now. My aim here is just to introduce you to some of the complexities that you'll encounter as you continue working with Tibetan grammar and you make your way into reading and trying to understand Tibetan poetry.